My name is Vanessa Calloway. I'm 34 and I work as a certified public accountant, which means I know exactly what things are worth. 5 weeks before my sister's wedding, my mother called to tell me I wouldn't be attending, after I'd already handed the bride a house worth $510,000. It's just for close family, my sister told me, and laughed while she said it. So on her wedding afternoon, while a string trio tuned up across town, I sat in a quiet law office signing my name at the bottom of a page. What my parents discovered on a public records site before the cake was cut wasn't that the house was gone. It was whose name it had gone to, and what that name meant to my father. Welcome back to the channel where we talk about the quiet ones, the family members who never raise their voices because they're too busy holding the pen. If you've ever paid for everything and been invited to nothing, this one's for you. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe, because how this ends is worth staying for. I should tell you up front that I'm not a dramatic person. I balance books for a living. I like numbers precisely because they don't have feelings you have to manage. So when I tell you this story ends with a courthouse document instead of a shouting match, understand that's not a plot twist for effect, it's just who I am. The quietest exit is usually the one nobody sees coming, because everyone's too busy watching the door for a slammed one. To understand the house, you need 18 years of context. I was 16 when my father's hardware store collapsed, and our kitchen table disappeared under collection notices and an unopened bankruptcy packet. My dad stared at the pile like it might apologize. My mom poured coffee nobody drank. I was the one who opened the envelopes and called the scariest number to ask a stranger to explain it slowly. That night, I became the reliable one, and in my family, that title never expires. It just compounds. When my father needed help with debt, the checks came from my after-school job, then my college job, then my career. When my sister Marissa needed tuition, I covered it. When my mother's car died, I bought the next one. Nobody ever demanded it directly, there's just a silence shaped like your name, and you learn to fill it. Somewhere around 20, I stopped noticing I was doing it at all. It became a reflex, like checking twice before merging lanes. A bill would surface at dinner. My mother would sigh in that particular key, and my hand would already be reaching for my phone before anyone finished the sentence. I kept every receipt, not to collect, but because I'm an accountant and we don't discard records. 18 years of my family's history sat in a fireproof box in my closet. I told myself it was habit. It was a pattern. I filed it under love instead. Last September, my sister got engaged, and the pattern got a wedding date. Marissa's fiancé, Derek Ashcombe, comes from money, country club, commercial real estate, a lake house they call the cabin. Derek himself is pleasant, a little beige. It was my mother who transformed. Within a month, Diane Calloway had a new haircut and a rewritten family history. At the first joint dinner, she described my father as an entrepreneur who'd exited retail at the right moment. The bankruptcy became a pivot. When Derek's mother, Pamela, asked whether my father had siblings, my mother smiled and said, "It's really just the four of us, a small, close family." My father studied his plate. I knew exactly whose name they were avoiding, my father's older sister, absent from every Christmas since I was 9. I said nothing. But I remember thinking there was something strange about that exact phrase. Hold on to it because my mother uses it again later, and the second time cost her far more. By October, the wedding had a venue and a date, June 14th, and one unspoken problem. Marissa and Derek couldn't afford anywhere near the Ashcombes' world. My mother never asked me directly. She just sighed at a particular frequency about where the kids would live. Here's what I had. A duplex I'd renovated for 6 years sold that summer, netting $285,000. I had $145,000 in savings and $80,000 from my grandmother Aliner's estate. Added up, $510,000, exactly the price of a gray colonial on Birwood Lane, 10 minutes from the Ashcombes Club. I paid cash. I told myself it was a wedding gift. Mostly it was. But it was also an application. 18 years of quiet checks had bought me, I hoped, a seat near my own family. A good accountant would have flagged that feeling as a red entry. I filed it under love. Same folder as always. I bought the house in my own name, not a scheme, just how a careful person structures a large gift. My attorney, Owen Pierce, drafted a transfer deed to eventually move the house into Marissa's name. My mother wanted a key ceremony at the reception, my father handing over a ribboned key, a photographer capturing the tears. Fine. I don't need staged moments. But until that deed was signed, Owen told me, the house was legally mine. No accountant transfers a $500,000 asset into a marriage before the prenup is finished anyway. So in March, Marissa and Derek moved in early. The tax bill came to me. Insurance, utilities, mine. Marissa posted the kitchen with the caption, "Home Sweet Home." I kept one brass key on my ring between my condo key and office key, because owners keep a key. Looking back, everyone had a key to that house except the truth, which was still waiting on a signature. Two people were counting on more than they were counting on me. The engagement party in January handed me my first real invoice. I was seated at the last table, by the espresso machine, next to Derek's college roommate's girlfriend, and a hearing aid salesman nobody could quite place. From back there, I had a clean view of the head table, decorated with centerpieces I hadn't paid for yet but soon would. My father stood with a champagne glass and toasted the ashcomb's warmth. He thanked good timing. He did not say my name, and I told myself that toasts are hard and fathers are worse at them. I was still telling myself that 20 minutes later at the coat check, when Pamela Ashcombe touched my arm and asked warmly if I was with the event planning company. She thought I was staff. My mother stood right there with a 3-second window to laugh and say, "This is my daughter, she's the reason any of this exists." Instead she said, "Oh, she's just helping out," and steered Pamela toward the dessert table like I was a wrong turn in a hallway. I drove my parents home that night. Somewhere on the highway, my mother told me quietly that the Ashcombes reminded her of her own in-laws, that at her 1990 wedding, my grandmother Alina had walked the reception counting the flowers out loud so everyone understood how little the bride's family had spent. 30 years, she said, and I can still hear her counting. Then she snapped her purse shut. I didn't understand yet that she wasn't apologizing for the last table. She was explaining why there'd always be one. Wedding season turned my inbox into a cash register, florist deposits, dress alterations, just this once. A phrase my family uses the way other families use hello. One Tuesday in March, out of professional reflex, I opened the old spreadsheet beside the receipts box. I didn't total it yet. I just scrolled. 61,000 toward my father's debts over the years, 38,000 for Marissa's tuition, 9,000 for my mother's car, 7,000 in wedding costs so far, 12,000 in smaller emergencies. I closed the laptop and sat with my chest doing something I didn't have a column for. That Sunday, I tried to joke about the florist naming a bouquet after me. My mother didn't laugh. She slid an invoice across the table like passing the salt and said, "Family doesn't keep score, Vanessa." I paid it that night from my phone in the dark, thinking she was right in a way I didn't have words for yet. Somebody at that table wasn't keeping score. Somebody else had never once stopped. The call came on a Tuesday in early May, 5 weeks out. My mother's bright, managed voice. "We're keeping the ceremony small, intimate, just the closest people." Then, "You understand, don't you, we've had to be strict about the list." I laughed, assuming she wanted money again. "Mom, am I on the list?" A pause. "We think it's best if you sit this one out. Nothing personal. The Ashcombes want a certain kind of day." Marissa came on speaker, bright as a bell. "Don't make it weird, V, it's only for the closest family." She laughed, not cruelly, just at something obviously, comfortably true. Before hanging up, my mother reminded me the florist's balance was due Friday. I gave it 3 days, then called my father. Walter Calloway has spent 40 years perfecting a tone that sounds like agreement and commits to nothing. "Your mother handles the details, honey." I asked if he thought it was right. He told me the lawn at Birchwood Lane was coming along nicely. That was my answer. Then I audited. The small, intimate ceremonies florist invoice sent to my email listed centerpieces for 18 tables of 10, 180 guests. My cousin Delilah, who Marissa sees maybe 4 times a decade, had already gotten her invitation. 180 people made the cut. The woman who bought the house did not. There was a real, specific reason my name couldn't be on that list, and it was worse than anything I guessed that week. What follows an exclusion like that isn't apology, it's crowd control. My mother called twice more, checking I wasn't spiraling. An aunt by marriage texted, "Keep the peace for Marissa's day." Even Delilah suggested I could join the brunch after. Everyone accepted the new arrangement instantly, like it had been rehearsed. The family wallet wouldn't attend the wedding, but would keep paying the vendors on schedule. Only my coworker Priya called it what it was. Over lunch, flat as a case study, I told her everything. She set down her fork. You bought your sister a house and you're not invited to the wedding. Say that sentence out loud. I couldn't. 34 years old, and I'd never once said a true sentence about my family at full volume. That Friday, my mother called with a soft, warm tone, wanting to come by Sunday, just us. Some 16-year-old part of me, still at that old kitchen table, thought, finally, she's coming to fix this. She wasn't. She arrived Sunday with banana bread my mother bakes for leverage, not affection. She set a manila folder on my counter and opened it with 2 fingers. The transfer deed, signature line flagged in yellow, a pen already lying across it. We think it's best to sign this now, she said, so nobody has to think about money on the day. I asked, am I back on the guest list? She sighed. Those are 2 separate matters, Vanessa. Clean as a balance sheet. My presence and my money, filed under separate accounts. I asked why Delilah and 180 strangers and not me. For 1 second her smile cracked and my actual mother looked through it. She told me about her own 1990 wedding, the whispering about her family's rented hall, my grandmother Alina counting flowers out loud. I was 22. I learned exactly what I was worth to them. I will not let those people look at Marissa that way. For a moment I pitied her. I still didn't pick up the pen. Days later, at the bridal boutique settling yet another alterations balance, Pamela Ashcombe lit up when she saw me. She's not a villain, just a kind woman who believes what she's told. What your parents did for the kids, buying that house, Derek's father was so impressed. A family that can do that quietly is exactly the kind you want at your table. I stood there holding a receipt for a dress I'd never see walk down an aisle, doing the math in real time. I didn't correct her, not weakness, just professional caution. I don't detonate a wedding over 1 second-hand sentence. I'm an accountant, we verify. But driving back, one question repeated with every mile marker. If the Ashcombes believed my parents bought that house, who told them and how long ago? A lie that specific isn't small talk. It's infrastructure. That night I verified everything, the county auditor's site, public as a park bench. Owner of record, Vanessa Calloway. The unsigned deed still in the folder. Tax bill, insurance, utilities, all mine. Owen confirmed it plainly the next morning. A gift of real estate doesn't exist until the deed is signed and delivered. There is no gift, there's just your house with your sister living in it. My house. For a wedding I wasn't invited to, thrown by people who told their new in-laws they'd bought it themselves. It wasn't rage I felt. It was the feeling I get at work when a client's books finally confess, the mess resolving into a clean, ugly picture. Every unbalanced ledger wants to be closed. I didn't yet know how, but for the first time in 18 years, I understood I was the one holding the pen. That Friday night, I finally totaled the spreadsheet. $61,000 for my father's debts, $38,000 for tuition, $9,000 for the car, $7,000 in wedding costs, $12,000 in emergencies. Total, $127,000, and that didn't include the house. I set the brass key beside the folder with the unsigned deed, under the kitchen light. 18 years of paid, against 1 column of received containing nothing but a laugh through a speakerphone and a seat by an espresso machine. I left the key on the table instead of pocketing it. It turned out to be the only thing my family ever gave back, and the only thing I'd end up needing. That weekend, sorting through the fireproof box, I found a business card I'd forgotten from my grandmother's funeral folder. Heavy stock, Renata Calloway Commercial Cleaning Services, Dayton. My father's older sister, the one written out of every Christmas since I was 9. I'd seen her once in 25 years, standing alone at Alina's funeral. She'd studied me and said, "You're the one who handles things, aren't you?" Then pressed the card into my hand. "Call me when the bill comes due," and walked into the rain. The family's version of her was 2 sentences. Selfish, abandon this family. No details. Standing in my kitchen at 2 a.m., I understood I'd just spent a week learning exactly how my family edits its own history and what the actual crime usually is. Monday, I called her. Renata picked a diner off the highway, the kind with laminated menus and a bell over the door, ordered black coffee and a slice of pie she never touched, and studied me faux. A long while before she said anything that mattered. She was 63, dressed like a woman who does her own property walkthroughs, with the stillness of someone who stopped auditioning for anyone's approval decades ago. I told her everything, the house, the deed, the guest list, the florist invoice, my mother's folder, and talked for 20 straight minutes without her interrupting once. which in my family qualifies as a paranormal event. When I finished, she filled in the missing chapter, plainly, no self-pity anywhere in it. 25 years earlier, when the hardware store first started sinking and I was 9, my father had asked her to pour her savings into keeping it afloat. She looked at his books first. That detail almost made me laugh, considering, and the book said the store couldn't be saved. It would take 7 more years to finish drowning, but the ending was already written in the numbers. So she said no. She offered to help with groceries, with the mortgage, with anything real, but not a blank check into a hole. By Easter, she was the villain. Your grandmother sat right where you're sitting and told me family means you don't count the cost, Renata said. I told her everybody counts. Some of us just do it on paper and the rest do it out loud at weddings. Then, quieter, they wrote me out of every Christmas after that. You know what I learned, kiddo? Love you have to pay for is just rent. She said it the way you'd read a line off an invoice, no bitterness in it, only fact. She pushed her pie aside, leaned back, and asked the question that rearranged the rest of my life. So what do you still own, Vanessa? I drove home with that question in the passenger seat, and my sister answered it for me before I could. Wednesday, a breezy text from Marissa. Mom says the deed thing still isn't signed. Can you just leave the signed papers plus your key to my house in the mailbox before the 14th? Cleaner that way, no awkward scene at the wedding lol. It's only for the closest family, you get it. Followed by a thumbs up, approving its own message. I read it maybe 10 times in my parking garage. Your key to my house, a house whose tax bill carried my name. No awkward scene, meaning no you. Here's what I finally understood. Marissa wasn't being cruel. Cruelty requires seeing the other person. My sister genuinely couldn't conceive that the mailbox belonged to me, that her whole life there was borrowed. That's the world my parents built. One where my money fell from the sky like weather, and nobody thanks the sky. I typed and deleted a lot of things. What I sent back fit on a receipt. Understood. She hearted it. That was the last conversation my sister and I had before her wedding. Thursday, I sat with Owen and stress-tested everything. Could I sell the house? Yes, my name, my decision. The unsigned deed carried no legal weight at all. Could Marissa claim I'd promised it? Maybe a doctrine, maybe 5 minutes of a judge's patience, but she'd paid nothing, fixed nothing, lived rent-free for 3 months while I covered taxes and insurance. Legally, tenants at will. Any new owner takes the house subject to them with proper written notice. I could have kept the house and simply never signed, held it over the family for a decade. I didn't want to win their game. I wanted out of the casino. I knew exactly one person who understood what this family does to people who stop paying. That afternoon, I made a phone call. Before you judge what I did next, total your own receipts first. If it looks anything like mine, hit subscribe. Saturday, at the empty house pulling the insurance renewal from the mailbox, Pamela Ashcombe pulled into her tennis friend's driveway next door and lit up when she saw me. Radiant with wedding week energy, she mentioned that Derek's father was so impressed with my parents' generosity that he'd invited 2 business partners to the wedding, wanting them to meet, the kind of family that buys their kids a house and never says a word about it. Then warmly, it's such a shame you'll still be overseas for the big day. Your mother's so proud of you, overseas. My parents hadn't forgotten to invite me. They needed me gone. 180 guests could attend because none of them knew anything true. I was the only person alive whose presence would contradict the story, a walking receipt for exactly what their new life was built on. I drove straight to my parents' house. Their kitchen smelled like pot roast and a story that badly needed maintenance. I didn't yell, you know that about me by now. I sat at their table and laid it out the way I'd lay out terms in a client meeting. I knew exactly what the Ashcombes believed, and I knew who'd told them. I wasn't asking for a toast or a refund. I was offering one honest exit, and I priced it fairly, tell them the truth about the house, however they wanted to phrase it, and I'd sign the deed, stay overseas as far as anyone needed to know, and Marissa would keep her day intact. My father studied the tablecloth like it owed him an explanation. My mother folded her hands, and I watched her run the numbers. I know that calculating face, I inherited it. What came back was gentle as a lullaby. Family doesn't keep score, Vanessa. I told her the truth wasn't a score, it was simply a fact. My mother stopped being gentle after that. She stood, collected my coffee cup mid-sip the way she does when a conversation is finished, and told me plainly that the Ashcombes were finally looking at this family with respect, and if I did anything to embarrass us before that wedding, I shouldn't bother coming back afterward either. You've always been the strong one, she said at the sink with her back to me. Everyone contributes what they have. Marissa gives this family a future. You, she paused, choosing the word precisely, handle things. So handle yourself. I looked at my father. 40 years of sounding like agreement, and he met my eyes for half a second before saying, "Listen to your mother, honey." I stood, rinsed my own cup because I was raised right, and walked out past the pot roast. In the car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. I stopped keeping score that night. On the drive home, I decided to close the books instead. Sunday night, I called Renata back with an answer to the question she'd asked me at the diner. "A house," I said. 18 Birchwood Lane, 4 bedrooms and oak tree out front, 10 minutes from that club. I paid $510,000 for it, and I'm selling it full price, nothing clever. I want it done fast, clean, and quiet. I'm offering it to you first because I think you and I might be the only 2 people alive who'd understand the rest of it. A long silence. Then, kiddo, I've spent 25 years being the name nobody says at that table. I'll buy the table. Dryly, I'll need the inspection anyway. Sentiment is sentiment, money is money. I laughed for real, for the first time in a month. We talked numbers like professionals. She'd use a credit line, close in cash, no lender, done in under 2 weeks with a clean title search. Before hanging up, she asked one thing. "Pick the closing date, Vanessa. Pick it on purpose." On June 3rd, in Owen's conference room, I signed a purchase agreement selling the house to Renata Calloway for $510,000. Closing, 11 a.m., June 14th. Yes, that June 14th. A wedding consumes a family's attention for a week on either side of it. Nobody checks county records during that window, and my family had always assumed there'd forever be an after for my signature to wait inside. June 14th wasn't a stage. It was a blind spot. Revenge, in my profession, is just a date on a contract. I made one request before we finished. Renata had to agree in writing that whoever was living in the house would get proper written notice and a full 30 days, nothing sprung on anyone's doorstep. She signed without hesitation. I clean offices, kiddo. I don't make messes. 11 days stood between me and the 14th. The inspection happened Thursday while Marissa and Derek were away at the lake house, but Birchwood Lane is the kind of street where neighbors notice everything. Saturday, Marissa texted, confused about people with clipboards at her house. I wrote back the truest thing I've ever texted anyone. The owner had the gutters checked before summer storms. Every word factual. She replied, "Oh, okay, lol, then. Mom says she's handling the house stuff anyway." 6 days out, and there it was again. Any strangeness resolved automatically to Mom handling it, because in their world the house had only ever fallen from the sky. The night before the wedding, I sat on my balcony with an untouched glass of wine, the brass key catching the streetlight beside me. Tomorrow it would stop being mine. Somewhere across town, a rehearsal dinner was happening without me. That was fine. I had an appointment of my own. 8:40 the next morning my mother called, her voice soft in a way I hadn't heard since before the hardware store died. "The Ashcombs keep asking about you. There's a seat for you today. Front row with family where you belong, wear the blue dress." I closed my eyes. The seat was real and genuinely offered, and every cell in me that was still 16 leaned toward it. Then she itemized it. "Monday, we'll all sit down and finally get the paperwork signed, and this whole silly season will be behind us." The seat had a price tag, and it was my signature. The tragedy is that this might have worked if she'd tried it in March. The ceremony was at 4. The closing was at 11. I stood in my kitchen in the blue dress, I'll admit that much, and to no one else with my car keys in one hand and 18 years in the other, and 2 hours to choose between the seat I'd always wanted and the person I'd just become. I looked at Mize. LF in the hallway, mirror longer than I needed to. The dress still fit. That was almost the cruelest part, that nothing about me had changed enough on the outside to match what had shifted underneath. At the title office, a beige building beside a mattress showroom, I sat with Owen on my left and Renata across from me, my phone face up beside the documents, my mother's voicemail still glowing. I asked for 1 minute. I thought about the seat, front row, my mother's hand on my arm, some Ashcombe business partner asking about the sister who's done so well. 1 phone call away. Then I thought about what that seat was made of. It only existed while the story held. I could sit in it as the daughter home from overseas, never as the woman who'd paid for the floor beneath it. Monday, the real signature would come due, and after that, the next invoice because there is always a next. My mother had said it best. Family doesn't keep score. She was right, a score implies both sides can win. What we had was rent, and rent renews. I'm ready, I said. It took 11 signatures, and my hand stayed steady through all of them. At the deed itself, I paused, felt the seat pull one last time, and signed Vanessa Calloway in the handwriting I'd used on 18 years of checks. The wire cleared before noon. Renata shook my hand like a colleague. Nobody hugged, it would have been wrong for that room. I sat in my car afterward in the blue dress I'd worn for myself, and cried for about 4 minutes for the 16-year-old who'd believed it would someday be her turn. It finally came. It just arrived signed, not served. I wasn't at the reception, so I'll tell it as it reached me through Delilah's texts, arriving like weather bulletins, and a long call from Derek 2 days later that filled in the rest. The ceremony went perfectly, and I want that said plainly. Marissa was married under an arch of white roses I'd helped pay for, and by every account she was luminous. I'm not sorry about that part, and no part of this story requires me to be. The collapse was scheduled for the toasts. Around 8 o'clock, my father stood up with a microphone and the little ribbon box, and my mother rose beside him, radiant, because the key ceremony had always been the whole point, the moment the Ashcombe world would watch the Calloway family hand over a house. My father cleared his throat and began the speech my mother had surely drafted, something about roots and foundations and family. Meanwhile, at the head table, Derek's father Frederick had his phone out. 2 of his business partners were flying in Monday to look at parcels near Millgrove, and Frederick, being Frederick, pulled up the county auditor's site mid-toast to make a point about how fast the neighborhood was appreciating. He typed in the address to show them the comparables. And there it was, refreshed that very afternoon, public as a stop sign. Sale recorded June 14th, grantee Renata Calloway. Frederick frowned and turned the phone toward Pamela, who said, into a gap between my father's sentences, at a volume that carried across 9 tables. Walter, who is Renata Calloway? Delilah said you could hear the ice machine. My father stood there holding a key to a house that had stopped belonging to us at 11 that morning, hearing his sister's name spoken aloud in public for the first time in 25 years, at the exact center of the audience he'd built the lie for. My mother's smile held like a wall while the building moved underneath it. She took the microphone, mentioned a mix-up on the county website, and waved the band on. Nobody danced for a while. I turned my phone on the next morning to 41 missed calls, but only 2 conversations from that weekend actually matter. The first, Saturday night, my father called Renata for the first time in 25 years, asking in a hollow voice how she could do this to the family. She was watering tomatoes in the dark. You know how it works, Walt. It's only for the closest family. Then she hung up and slept, she said, like a mortgage finally paid off. The second, Derek called Monday, calm and careful, asking real questions in order like a man conducting his first audit. I answered with documents, the October purchase, my name on the title, the tax bills, the invoices. He was quiet a long moment, then said, they told us your parents bought it. My dad brought business partners because of it. I gave him the sentence I'd carried since the bridal shop. I know, that's why I wasn't invited. He apologized, the only one anyone ever offered me. Monday evening, Renata asked me to come by. Her car sat in the driveway of the house my family had performed inside for 9 months, and she was on the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea, sitting in the good chair like a woman who has actually read her own deed. We didn't talk about the wedding for a while. She told me about the gutters, about her plans to repaint the front door. Deep forest green, because gray colonials take themselves too seriously. Then I did the thing I'd actually come to do. I took the brass key off my ring where it had sat since October and held it out. Yours, I don't keep keys to other people's houses. She looked at the key, then at me for a long moment and didn't take it. She folded my fingers back over it with her rough, capable hand instead. Keep it, no conditions. I sat there on my aunt's porch with my hand closed around that key, and I want to tell you what actually broke open in me, because it wasn't sadness. For 18 years, every single thing that passed between me and the people I loved had paperwork behind it, an invoice, a balance, an expectation with a due date. This was the first object anyone in my family had ever put in my hand for free. That's when I finally understood what I'd been doing since I was 16. I hadn't been buying love. Love was never for sale, that was the whole secret. I'd been paying rent on a seat near it, and the rent, all along, had been me. Here's the final accounting. Marissa and Derek came home to a certified letter, 30 days, by the book, and moved into Derek's condo. My parents sent one letter through an attorney using the word promised a great deal. It died quietly a few weeks later, since there was nothing in writing, nothing paid, nothing improved. I never answered the family group chat, which had reclassified me somewhere between invisible and criminal. Instead, I mailed each of them a copy of the spreadsheet, 18 years, every entry dated, $127,000, and the house at the bottom. No note, no demand. Nobody ever wired a cent back. Nobody ever called to discuss it. The silence itself was the most honest reply my family ever sent me. You can argue with an angry woman. You cannot argue with a ledger. My mother's news story is that I was never really family, always cold, always transactional, always keeping score. I've decided to let her have that one, since it's the first true thing she's said about me in years. I kept the records nobody wanted kept. In my experience, that's what cold usually means. The Ashcombs didn't cut my parents off entirely. That only happens in movies. The invitations just became seasonal, then annual, then commemorative. Nobody has ever again asked the Calloway family to buy anything, which is its own kind of headstone. Marissa and I don't speak. Some Sundays that sits on my chest like a stone, and I let it sit. Grief is one account you can't prepay. As for me, Sunday dinners are at Birwood Lane now, at a table Renata bought at an estate sale because it had already survived one family. Delilah visits when the drive works out. Priya brings wine and opinions. Last month I fixed a window seal while Renata held the ladder and criticized my technique. Driving home, I noticed what had been missing the whole afternoon: the meter. That quiet, lifelong sound of it running. I'm still the one who handles things. That part of me is real, and I've stopped apologizing for it. The difference now is that when I hand somebody something, they say thank you, and the transaction actually completes. Nothing carries forward. Nothing accrues. There's no invisible tab running underneath the friendliness, waiting to be called in at the worst possible moment. On Renata's key hook by the green front door, there's a brass key that stopped being mine in June, and for the first time, actually is hers, mine, ours, in a way that doesn't need a deed to make it real. My aunt told me once, over pie she never touched, that love you have to pay for is just rent. I'm 34, I own my own name again, and I don't pay rent anymore. That's the whole story. One unsigned deed, one brass key, and a seat I finally stopped paying for. If someone in your life treats your love like a line item on an invoice, let this be your sign to close the books. Tell me in the comments, would you have signed? Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.